Welcome to What is Going Om for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. There are two 5-letter words in our vocabulary that wield enormous control over us. One we think about often, sometimes several times a day. The other tends to sit more quietly in the background until we're forced to think about it. Both influence how we live our lives, the decisions we make, the risks we take, and whether or not we ultimately love the life we're living. One of those words is money, and the other one is trust. There might not seem to be a connection between the two, but both have to be looked at in a new way if we want to resolve the past trauma that glues old patterns in place and redefine wealth and well-being and build the new future we're all yearning to create. Susan Belchamber's graduate degrees in psychotherapy and international relations and economics, as well as her work in government, private industry and non-profits, has led her to become something of a socio-economic revolutionary who appreciates the role of money but also cares deeply about things like community, consciousness, justice and all the things that money cannot buy. A passionate advocate for replacing a world of winner-take-all by creating a world of collaborative synergy, her current work focuses on facilitating personal integration of collective and intergenerational trauma, with specific focus on healing trauma around money, envisioning new economic possibilities, and enhancing our capacity for deepened trust. Susan Belchamber, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sandie. That was a beautiful introduction.
Susan, you say on your website that you've been oscillating between research and practice in psychology and economics throughout your career as an analyst and trade specialist in the US government, an international trade consultant in the UK, as well as your work in private practice and group facilitation. Tell me how those diverse areas of interest came together to provide the foundation of what you're doing now.
That's a really interesting question that I've been living into my whole life. I believe I had some questions. I think some of the big questions that have really moved through me. And one of them was, why do we behave like we do, even when it seems against our best longer-term interests, right? Why do people get trapped in things like addictions? Why do they do things that they just are, it's not in their interest to do? And then I also had this deep, deep question about, why don't we choose to go after things that we really value? You ask anybody and you ask them about what they value, they'll say their family, their health, their nature, right? And yet, as you very well know, we often don't walk our talk with that we don't really move in the areas that would be to our best interest and our most valued resource. So this is where psychology meets economics for me, or behavioral economics, if you will. And I'm looking at this, and I've really done a lot of research with neuroscience. I've done a lot of research about attachment theory and various different things in my training as a psychotherapist. But only recently, really, in my learning, I didn't learn this when I was in grad school to become a therapist. We weren't really talking about trauma the way that we know it now. That trauma that glues our old dysfunctional responses to life in place, right? And so, and that this work on trauma, I'm going, okay, so why? What breaks this down? We know trauma begins to remediate or get better with safety. So what does safety entail? And for me, that's where the whole focus on trust started really coming to the forefront. What do we trust? How do we trust? What do we mistrust? So that became my latest big feature of research and interest.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because we don't think about money and trust being associated, and we don't think about the trauma that can happen when we lose trust. I mean, what we're watching play out on the world stage right now is so many people who have lost their faith, lost their trust in all of the institutions and organisations that they felt were so solid. And when you lose trust, I mean, you know, when something disappoints you, when something turns out not to be what you thought it was, what you depended on, there's cognitive dissonance. And it really, you know, interferes with the brain and your emotions as well.
Exactly. Well said. That is so true. I've been looking recently at what's been referred to as the confidence cult, and this idea that what is fake versus real confidence. I think this is a big deal right now. What is a reliable thing to trust and what is not? Maybe I'll just backtrack before I go into that and say about what trust is built on. Would that be a good idea?
Yeah, perfectly, yeah.
Yeah. So trust, and I'm using this from my friend Charles Feltman's Thin Book of Trust. Trust is built on 4 specific things. Sincerity, which is how honest you are and do your words and actions align. So sincerity is 1. Reliability is 2. Like, can you meet your commitments? Can you keep your promises? 3 is your competence. You could have a lot of sincerity and reliability, but if you don't have the ability or capacity to follow through, that puts into question your competence. And lastly, number 4 is care. This is a little bit more amorphous, but it's so essential. Care, you trust when you know that the other person has your interests at heart, or at least in mind, so that they're not just going after what's of interest to them. So sincerity, reliability, competence, and care are the backbones of trust. And these can build or break down in so many facets. We know this is breaking down, like you said, in the world at large, with our governments, with all, it breaks down at work. It breaks down in relationships. So, but just as we know that we can often lose our sense of trust very, very readily. You can build it up for a long time, and then it can go down in minutes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And right now, I mean, what I was talking about fake versus true confidence is, I'll read a couple of these, and you'll recognize it. We'll all recognize this, and yet it's so funny. We also lose track of it. With pseudo-confidence, it's not being open to learn. Whereas with true confidence, you believe in your capacity to learn and grow, right? You can feel this in people.
Yeah.
You know, in pseudo-confidence, you're defensive and hiding mistakes. In true confidence, you accept responsibility for your mistakes and know that you can rectify them. With pseudo-confidence, you are arrogant, overacting often, and deflect questions, oppose differing ideas. Whereas with true confidence, and you don't put on airs. You have humility. You rely on substance rather than style. And I mean, it goes on and on that it's really one side, the pseudo-confidence is about scarcity, and the other true confidence is about helping, giving, and having abundance. You know, you don't have to hide and create silos. So you can feel this, can't you, about how this concept of the pseudo-confidence is a huge breakdown of trust. And yet that is what a lot of what we've supported in our leaders, both in business and in government.
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, really, at the end of the day, you know, it's all about fear or love.
Yes.
Closed or open, you know, safety or danger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
so many people right now do not have confidence, you know, because the foundation of their confidence has been, you know, pulled from under them.
Yeah, and this is where there's two pieces I would really like to go to. One is a recent person that you interviewed on your program, I'm forgetting his name, you'll know it immediately, was talking about entropy versus syntropy.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, and HeartMath speaks a lot about this. And that entropy is focusing on the breakdowns of order, right? But what can live into is the syntropy of more complex, orderly, and coherent world. And that this is where learning trust, and we can learn trust not just from the outside in, but from the inside out. We can have trust or mistrust in others, certainly, and in our organizations, in our governments. But developing trust from the inside out, trust in self and trust in the universe, is every bit as essential, because it makes us have a different relationship with the experiences in the world. For instance, oxytocin, you know, the wonderful chemical that supports our interconnection, also supports higher brain function, which means that you can build and strengthen your capacity of the neocortex to have a question, to really question your immediacy of your reaction to something that you perceive as fearful or that you mistrust. Because as soon as you sense mistrust, your amygdala reaction starts, flaring up. It heats up, literally heats up in the brain. And you start shutting down, and you start responding to people with, primarily unconscious, pre-programmed defensive behavior, right? This is what mistrust does to us. And these behaviors can include things like resistance and aggression and withdrawal, and they're unproductive. Yeah. But we do them. Obviously, we do them. But with attention and intention and practice and strengthening, we can override this neurophysiological distrust response and go back to, okay, let me go back and think about what I need to trust here. What are my markers? What is my interior sense of trust saying? It's really remarkable. It's Daniel Kahneman says, the slow versus fast thinking. This is something that happens, that we have to learn in our bodies to slow down for a moment, take a few breaths, and ask ourselves some questions about what it is that we're really trusting. What do we really value? What do we really want?
Yeah. You must see in your work, I would say an epidemic of people who are really struggling with this one, because when you lose your trust in something outside of you, you also lose your trust in yourself, your ability to make good decisions. And how do you even begin to start? I mean, you've run through, some chemicals, some, the brain, etc., and how it operates. But what are you doing when you are helping somebody to rebuild their confidence and trust in themselves? What sort of things do you do? What kinds of practical techniques and tools can you offer?
There are techniques and tools. I think we'll have time to do at least one or two of them. But, the thing that is making the most difference in people's lives, Sandie, is this desire, this inner, deep, deep desire for community. That's what's changing. And, I really have faith in evolution, in the universe capacity for evolution that depends on our capacity to form connection and community and act together in collaborative synergy, that term that I love using. And when people fall away from trust, when they've had many experiences, maybe they've had abuse, some deep, horrible things that can happen to people, unthinkable things, to bring them back to a sense of safety, oftentimes one-on-one with a counselor or a therapist of some form. But then often people need groups. That's why groups are so essential. And the safety and the security and of intimate groups is almost without doubt the most important things people have found that helps. For instance, we know that for people that have been in wars, that have been warriors and soldiers and have PTSD from trauma and war zones, they can do individual work. It's absolutely mandatory. There really are ways to deal with PTSD now that can really help dramatically, surprisingly. But then to be able to process it in your own reality, in your own brain, in your own emotions, vets often need to be with other vets and have the safety of knowing that this person has lived through what you've lived through, right?
Yeah.
That's what builds trust. Because that person, isn't speaking from some fictional characterization, a TV show or something, that they've lived it. So they know how difficult it is. And that trust building within groups is an essential thing. That's why just tonight, I'm starting a group on trust and sinking into trust with a small group. It's what I love to work with. I think small groups are just an essential component of psychology. I don't think one-on-one is enough in today's world, frankly, which kind of goes counter to the world of psychology. But a lot of my other therapist friends are sensing this too. So it's really becoming vulnerable again, to not having to hide away and to be able to face others with your vulnerability is a great marker of health and really how we can help people move towards a sense of trust in the world and in themselves again.
There's a book that you told me about called Creating a World That Works for All by Sharif Abdullah. And it was published in 1999. And he said that the problem, the world's a mess, the privileged few prosper, the masses suffer, and everyone feels spiritually empty. And most people would blame capitalism, racism, or some other ism. But he says the problem is not ideology, it's exclusivity, our desire to stay separate from other people. Now, this is something that has become very, very evident over the last few years. I know people who were so sociable before, who, since the pandemic, for whatever reason, have lost their desire to be with other people. So this desire to stay separate from other people, I don't think that's a natural desire, but that's something that we as a society create.
Yes. It's so true that, we do that because we're afraid and we think, safety means hiding out, saying separate from. But as we're learning, this is a really horrible reaction for children, for all of us, that we don't develop the skill sets of learning to be with each other. It feels essentially easier to just hide out and to become, in one of those bubbles, right? Everybody agrees with you. And also it's so easy to go into the shame and blame game, right? And but we don't realize how destructive that is for us. That's going back to my first question of why do we behave like we do when it's against our long-term interests? Because we know that there's so many examples in nature, in the world, where synergy is radically better. We know about the two workhorses. One can pull 1,000 pounds, the other can pull 1,000 pounds, but together they can pull 3,000 or 4,000 pounds, right?
Yeah.
Two pieces of wood that can hold, like in a shelf system, two pieces of wood hold more than the sum of their parts that either could hold individually or you suspect would hold collectively. Lasers, right? Lasers are just light beams that work in synergy together. These are just, endless examples of this. And so that we know this. We are the product of millions of years of evolution, maybe not millions of years as human beings, but certainly as life forms. And we've learned these things. Trees know how to adapt and share. We've heard of mycelium and all of this. So this is just I believe this is just a temporary response of humanity that is almost darkest before the dawn. Because if I trust in evolution, I really do. This is something, my spiritual development through years. I've not just been an academic, I've not just been a therapist. I've been a spiritual practitioner. And we're learning, I know so many groups now are recognizing the need for interior development as well as just going after, chasing the dollar, chasing some aspect of what we think will provide safety.
We're seeing a lot of that reflected in people who are resigning from their jobs, choosing to turn their backs on, the money, the ladder of success, and looking for more fulfillment in life.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a short break now, Susan, and we'll continue the conversation after the break. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is Susan Belchamber, whose graduate degrees in psychotherapy and international relations and economics, as well as her work in government, private industry and non-profits, has led her to become something of a socio-economic revolutionary. We're talking about how healing our personal and intergenerational issues around money and trust is necessary to move beyond the trauma that can imprison our capacity to make the changes we know we must make in the world. We'll be back with more from Susan Belchamber after the break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Vox Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Join me every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio for Vox Novus, the new voice.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Media's flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And I have a question for you. Have you ever walked through a bookstore and known in your heart that you should have a book on one of those shelves, but don't know how to make it happen? Writing your story and getting your book into print may feel intimidating, but it's remarkably easy and satisfying when you have an experienced professional to guide you. So if you're still striving to connect with your muse, find your authentic voice, formulate your ideas, present your message in compelling prose, publish your book, and build your platform and profile, just imagine what you could accomplish with 30 plus years of experience in writing, editing, publishing, judging, hosting, and resonance marketing to guide you. Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. If you know you have a book in you, but don't know how to get it out of your head and into the hands of those who are waiting to read it, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab, and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. Susan Belchamber, I've been looking at your website and some of the components that make up this series of Sinking Into Trust that you're offering. There's a couple of things I'd like to just clarify. You talk about learning to trust that we are and have enough. Can you say a little bit more about that?
It's so true. It feels so impossible, doesn't it? And in this world sometimes. But that's this concept of strength. That what I was talking about earlier, about this capacity of true confidence built on capacity and competence. It leads to, interestingly enough, a capacity for generosity, a capacity that you have what you need. And because you have such a deep trust in your own capabilities, you've proven yourself to yourself, you trust yourself. That is a wellspring of riches beyond measure. And because of this, other people trust you too. You have this capacity to magnetize like-minded people to you. People recognize people that are trustworthy. They can feel it in their bones. And so you between what you have and what you magnetize towards you, you always have a sense of enough. And I think, in addition, you begin to recognize what you truly value. Maybe you don't need that new car as much. Maybe you don't need to do things that cost money and buy that extra, that gold watch, whatever, to prove your value.
Is this where the money part comes in?
Pardon me?
Is this where the money part comes in?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Our attachment to money it's one of the saddest things that our culture has done. We've let go of our rootedness. We've as they say, the tallest tree needs the deepest roots, and we've forgotten that. We've cut off our roots. We think we can make it on our own, and that's where we have to, oftentimes, the masculine in us, not just in men, but in women too, begin to overemphasize a false confidence that we have things that we want to show off. We have a lot of shiny things around us versus the depth of our rootedness. So that is where enoughness emerges, when you have a sense of rootedness, a groundedness in your own capabilities, your own faith, and the love of the people around you.
Interesting, isn't it? There was a time for all of us, and I'm going back several hundred years, where, what we did with our day was grow our food. And,
right.
As long as we had enough food to last the winter, we were happy. Now, that's nowhere near enough. We've got to have this and we've got to have that, and, several more of those over there, and we're still not satisfied.
Yeah,
we've lost something really fundamental there.
Yeah, we have, and it's what we're attached to, and what we sense we need to prove our value, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, this wasn't part of our script, but I fell in love with, like millions and millions of others, with the TV program Ted Lasso. And it's just such a perfect example. You think about all those, what true confidence is, and this ability that you are willing to learn and grow, and accept responsibility, be kind and humble, be consistent, and, giving and helping. These are the things that we've actually, just like the show begins, where people are just going, oh my God, this guy is a naive buffoon, right?
Yeah.
And yet, little by... Pardon me?
We denigrate.
Yeah, we definitely denigrate. And yet, these are the very things that add to trust building. And this, over the seasons, you see the trust growing in most everybody. Now, there are backslidings, and there are people where trust is broken. But this capacity to be a human, to be humane and trustworthy as much as possible, that you can make mistakes. See, part of what's happening in our culture is that we're so afraid of making mistakes because we think we will be denigrated, that we'll be thought of, as a lesser. And yet mistakes are the very thing that get us to move forward, right? You can't change unless you can risk making mistakes. Yeah. So anyway, I'm so excited that this is showing up in our culture right now. That other options are showing up in other role models.
Well, they always do, don't they? We always, when something is kind of on the table for us to look at, we tend to see it reflected in our external world, some ways, a movie, a TV show, whatever. The thing that I'm interested in is how when your trust is broken, how do you forgive? How do you forgive other people? How do you learn? How do you get over, that obstacle of, well, it may happen again?
Well, it may happen again, but it's again like taking risks, right? if you don't cross the street, if you don't take the risk to cross the street, you're never going to see what's possible on the other side. When you have trust, we all know we can do better in our culture. And yet we get stuck in that glue I was talking about, the glue of our old dysfunctional responses to life. And, that's what I talk a lot about in Money and Trauma, my website. But when we develop our inner and outer strength, we just have more options. We have ways to both see we can begin to see when people are not worthy of our trust, right? Where we might have trusted them in the past. The snake oil salesman you're not going to buy it this time. That's one thing. But when you have trust in yourself to navigate through the world, it becomes so much more joyous. It becomes much more, life becomes worth living again because oxytocin begins to flow. You do find people that are worthy of trust, that are listening to you. You don't get inundated by your old stories and become a victim. That is just one of the saddest things that human beings happen when they become victimized. So they become so constricted that their world begins to shut down more and more and more. And to move out of victim consciousness is about taking responsibility. We know in all the 12-step programs, this is a huge part of what makes you move away from the shame and the blame of both, let's face it, we've all made some really bad mistakes in our lives. We've all put our trust in things that we, probably shouldn't have. But we can learn. We are adaptive.
So, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you continue. If you had something else to add, I was just going to move on a little bit. But
I was just going to say I know a friend of yours and somebody that I've followed a lot, Lee Harris, has said that 2022 is the year of building strength. This is what I think he means, that it's not, not just muscle building, which is obviously good for your body. And our bodies, listening to our bodies, it's one of the main things that when we move too fast and we kind of give in to our anxieties, we don't listen to our bodies. Our bodies tell us the truth, right? So we have this inner Geiger counter, if you will, that we don't pay enough attention to. So anyway, that was my point. You can follow on with that or ask me a different question.
I was going to ask you about some of the strategies and practices, that something really down to earth that listeners can perhaps, start employing straight away to help them begin to rebuild trust in themselves as well as in others.
That sounds good. Well, shall I lead us through perhaps
go ahead.
Experience? Yeah. Well, this happened. I'll tell you a little backstory about where this came from, because it sounds a little childlike, because it is in some ways. My son, when he was little, I think he was 6 or 7, we had a birthday party at a local fire station. Because, little 6 or 7-year-old boys are, often love fire trucks. So we had this beautiful fire station, and all these kids showed up, and the firemen taught them something. I have carried this with me ever since, that if you catch on fire, don't run. Stop, drop, and roll. Right? So you can imagine all these little, dozen or so little kids all stop, dropping, and rolling around having fun. But I really thought about this. I've been carrying this with me, and how this is so essential for us spiritually and psychologically. That Viktor Frankl, the wonderful author about Man's Search for Meaning, right?
Yeah.
That the key to it all is the space between stimulus and response. That if we can expand that space between what sets us off and how we respond, that is the key to a meaningful and probably happier life. So if we can just, and I think stop, drop, and roll is easy for people to remember, right? That it's stop. If we just can stop for a moment. People say count to 10, but I think this has even more juice to it. Just catch yourself in your trigger. What just set off your anxiety? What just activated your amygdala? Who said something to you that you go, oh my God, that you just drop into this, this horrible sense of self-doubt. Just take a moment and stop. And then this is where the practice comes in, where it really, really serves us. And I know it myself. I know you know it too, Sandie, that if we can learn to drop into our inner self, this resourced place of trust, where over time we've learned to trust ourselves. Just bringing a memory of going, okay, I can live through this. This isn't going to kill me. This is not, I can figure out my way if I just take a few breaths and figure out what my options are. Just simple. Just drop in. And then this little exercise that I do about roll. Obviously, you're not going to get down on the ground and roll around, probably. I guess you could. That might be fun. But literally and figuratively, focus on your body for a moment and roll your shoulders. Literally, roll them. And envision giving yourself an emotional massage, if you will, of saying, this is a massage between this is stretching me. This is something that has come into my awareness that I can use to stretch my reality here. That I don't have to fall into an old story of, this is how horrible this is, how much of a victim I am, or any of the old stories. But that you can begin to develop the muscles and lessen the constriction around your heart, really feel into your heart space. And you know in your heart that there's a capacity in you that can move forward, that you don't have to run and hide, that there are possibilities out there for you. So, and then for me, in addition to the roll, after I've kind of stopped and given myself, rolled my shoulders a few times and go, okay, what more do I need? What more resources are there for me? You can call on who or whatever might have a message for you, right? This is where your spiritual development really comes in. I have, if it's money stuff, my grandfather, who I never met, he died before I was even born, was a money guy. And I have a wonderful story about him pushing away from a deal that was going to make him lots of money, but was deeply dishonest, or at least he knew it wasn't right for him. And this story is embedded in me so that whenever I have that kind of issue in my life, I go, there are things that are more important than money. It's in me, and I can call on that memory of my grandfather to help guide me. Sometimes it's just having an image of the love of your child or your pet, your wonderful dog that looks at you like you're just the most important thing, the most wonderful thing on earth. God willing, each of us has at least a memory of that somewhere.
Something we value.
Yeah. Something we value, and that values us, that reminds us how valuable we are. Yeah. So anyway, stop, drop, and roll, and then call on your resources. And that's what we do in the interim when things are kind of okay for us. We add to our resource base.
You have resourcing as one of the topics that you cover. You say that it's our nervous system's best friend.
Yes, it is. It is. It's something, even those of us I've been part of the Pocket Project, pocketproject.org for years now. And
what is that?
It's a community Thomas Hugel began, and it started with 150 people from, I think, 32 different nations that got together to learn about trauma, intergenerational collective trauma. And we ran international labs last year on all kinds of topics, all around the globe. There was a lab, a Japanese lab. There was, in Israel, in Europe, in all kinds of labs in South America and here. And I helped co-facilitate a couple here in the States. We did racialized trauma. This is during George Floyd, the days of George Floyd. And the insurrection. That was pretty tough. But what we found over and over again, no matter who in the world was talking, whether it was my friends that were running the lab for in Colombia or here in America or anywhere on Earth, they found that people needed resourcing in order to be able to face the level of trauma that they've been exposed to. We needed to come together as a community to resource each other. We needed aspects of things. There's one woman, I still remember her, she was so delightful, that she was in Turkey. She was in Istanbul. And she goes, I have this plant. It was a flowering plant. I think it was an orchid. And she says, whenever I feel some level of distress, that this orchid represents the beauty available to me in the world. And I just stare at that for a little while, and something starts melting in me, and all my defensiveness starts letting go of it. How simple is that? But she learned to do that. That was her specific resource. That's what I would say, all the listeners and anybody listening, that to create your own list, your own little symbolic list, or even things that you collect, the perfect stone that caught your eye that looks like a heart or something, pictures that you've taken or you find online of things that represent beauty, things that represent trust, things that represent abundance. And that really resources people. And connecting with people, like-minded people in groups, not giving into isolation, to really reaching out and finding other groups where you can share these things with. Listening to programs like this on a regular basis, right? Expanding.
Yeah, expanding. We've only got about 5 minutes left. I know that you have a dream of, building healthy communities, economic justice and finding new forms of energetic exchange are deeply spiritual pursuits for you. The world seems to be at a pivotal point. Our, planet, our societies, everybody I think that I meet is approaching this new year with a certain amount of optimism. Certainly having shifted a lot of their perceptions about, money and trauma and trust and all kinds of things. Do you feel that we can make this, more beautiful world that many people feel is waiting for us? Do you think we can create that in our lifetime?
I actually do, Sandie. I actually do. I had said that, how people talk about planting like walnut trees, nut trees, that you plant them knowing that you might not see the benefits of the fruit of your planting in your lifetime. Like people who plant walnut trees usually don't. Walnut trees take a long time to grow. But I'm seeing change. I am part of an organizational development group that is doing such beautiful work in the world right now. There are, how can I go into this within a short term? I'm seeing ancient wisdom from our indigenous elders coming forward again.
Yeah.
That it's being recognized and honored in a way that we've given lip service to for years, but now we're really, when we're up against it, when the things we've done when our systems are breaking down, we have to, just because we want to stay alive. Life wants to live. Life wants to help us. That we will find a way back to the ancient wisdom and also begin to blend it with what is possible in the new. Like I have friends right now, I don't know if you know what an NFT is, non-fungible token, it's crypto stuff. But there's the possibility of using native art to help fund, program the indigenous sacred sites that need protection right now. This possibility is emerging. This group called Regen is taking carbon credits and helping native groups get funded again because we trust that they know what they're doing, right? That's where trust resides. So that's just one example. They're popping up all over the place. We're really experimenting with exchange at new levels again. With some of crypto is very much, not just very much, exactly like the old forms of currency. That's based on scarcity and so forth. And there's a lot of things to mistrust in that marketplace. But that doesn't mean everything is worthy of mistrust. There are some things that are also, I think, showing the way to generativity. So those are a couple of things that I just mentioned.
Well, it's certainly time for us to start making our feelings known for sure and participating, collaborating with one another, and creating communities that can be very productive because they are a community and not an individual. I tend to have a lot of hope for the future. Occasionally, I fall into a little bit of mistrust, but by and large, I'm an optimist, and I am pleased to see some of the initiatives that are being started and the creativity in them as well.
Yeah. I have to say a very personal shout out to my son, who always kind of referred to me as his mystical mama when he was growing up, and he wasn't giving me a compliment, right? He was kind of a subtle put down, as teenagers would do. But this guy, who's now 29, told me, "Mom, community is the only way forward. Even if you die before you accomplish it, I'm going to continue."
Ah, wow, there you go.
Forward.
And that's the generation that we really need to be getting this, and getting it in the muscle. Susan Belchamber, we're almost out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, this Sinking into Trust series that you've been doing, is it available to people now?
Well, it's as this comes on the air, it's probably, we've got our first group is full, and we're going to be working for the next few months on just this inaugural group. But I sense this is a mission that I want to continue. So please, if anybody's interested, go to moneyandtrauma.com and sign up for newsletters and let me know. Write to me if you're interested. I can certainly do this group again and again because we need to bring trust back into our lives.
Absolutely. This is a conversation, that has to be revisited. Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sandie.
So again, you can learn more about Susan Belchamber's work with money, trust and trauma at moneyandtrauma.com, and her Sinking into Trust series. You can learn more about that at innerpartsinstitute.com/sinking into trust. Okay, that's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of What Is Going On. Until then, it's goodbye from me.